Get it poppin' here. Shawn D. Rochester, yes.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. That means I actually have to deliver on that promise. Um, so while we get the charts up, I just want to thank all of you for being here on this morning. There's many other things that you could be doing. I think it says a lot about each of you as individuals and about this group in particular. The economic state of Black America is kind of in a perilous situation. We are dealing with a number of challenges. What I want to do today, oh, excellent. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about what I call the black tax. And the black tax is the financial cost of discrimination against Black people. And I've written a book on this. Now, when we talk about discrimination, it typically is from the perspective of the morality or the injustice associated with it. What I wanted to do was look at it from a different angle. I wanted to take a look at what is the financial cost of discrimination against Black people. And more importantly, what does research say that cost is? So the book is broken into 3 parts. The first part focuses on what I call the current black tax, which is discrimination and the cost of that discrimination in markets that are critical to wealth accumulation in the Black community. Housing, automotive, the financing and insurance that goes along with that, online commerce, the job search, high-end careers, capital raising for businesses. The second part of the book, I talk about what I call the historical black tax, which is the financial cost of discrimination from the days of slavery up until now. And in the third part of the book, I kind of summarize where we are from an economic perspective, and then I lay out an economic framework that I call PhD to be able to deal with some critical problems. Now, PhD stands for purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs, create businesses, and expand businesses in the Black community. The reason that this is critical is because today we're currently missing 6 million jobs across the broader Black community. We're also missing 1.4 million businesses with staff. Now, yes, we have 2.6 million Black businesses, but only about 4% of those businesses actually have employees. It's about 109,000. And that 4% generates almost 70% of all of the revenue rated by Black enterprise, about $100 billion, and they employ almost 1 million people. Super critical, but we only have about 109 or so thousand of those, and we're missing 1.4 million. In addition to that, we're also missing about $8 trillion of net worth or wealth from our collective balance sheet. And those 3 things are driving almost all the socioeconomic problems that we are challenged with. So they're incredibly important to deal with. Now, as with any kind of big challenge, what we need to do is make sure that we have a lot of people at the table to work on it, right? But here's the problem. It's really difficult to work with people on a problem if they don't think the problem exists, or if they think you're the problem. If you would just fix you, we would be great, right? So I'm sure you guys have heard that, Black people are not trying hard enough, right? That has more to do with where we are than any kind of form of discrimination. You got 6 in 10 Americans believe that. I'm sure you've heard that we have the same or better chance than white folks to do really well in this country. About 6 in 10 Americans believe that. I'm sure that you have heard that racism is really an excuse for failure. The failure is mine. I won't own it. I won't take responsibility for it. And I spend my time blaming everybody else. Right? Other people have come here. They have struggled. It has been difficult, but they have done quite well. 7 in 10 Americans believe that. The challenge is that if that is the prevailing view and thought process, then the programs and the strategies and the policies are going to reflect that thinking. Now, effective problem solving requires 2 really important things. One is empathy, your ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to be able to see and understand what they are dealing with. The other piece of it is understanding, which are things that I think we can all agree are sorely missing in our community, especially today. So I found this really great quote by Albert Einstein that he gave to the National Urban League convention back in 1946. And he said that we must make every effort to ensure that the past injustice, violence, and economic discrimination, the black tax, will be made known to the people. The taboo, let's not talk about it, must be broken. Albert Einstein was a massive advocate for black people and was very much against and outspoken when it came to our disenfranchisement. And he is known to be one of the greatest minds in many thousand years. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how we got here. And the here is, how is it possible that after 400 years, over 40 million African Americans own barely 2% of US wealth? That's the fact pattern. Either we are consistently and colossally inept, or there is something else going on in the environment that we need to take a closer look at. So that's what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to need you to do is go back with me to the time of slavery. Now, we're not going to go through all the detail on that. Volumes have been written on it. We're going to talk about it from an economic perspective. The first thing I need you to understand is that slavery, by definition, is a 100% tax on your labor. Nothing that you produce is yours. You are not even yours, right? There's many things that we could never value in that 250-year period. We can't value what it's like to be a woman and have no control over your body for the entirety of your life. We can't value what it's like to be a man and not be able to protect your wife or your daughter or your mother. We can't value what it's like to not partake in the fruits of your own labor or genius or invention. But what we can value, and what economists have looked at, is what is the value of the labor extracted from millions of people over a 250-year period, a quarter of a millennium. Now, some put that number upwards of 24 trillion, with a T, trillion. Others put it closer to 97 trillion. Now, if we say, listen, let's assume the truth is somewhere in the middle. We're talking about up to $50 trillion labor extracted from millions of people over a 250-year period. Now, if you're struggling to digest that number, the enormity of it, the size of it, the newness of hearing it, I get it, I understand. But that's not the only thing that we can value. Because if you go to like 1860, you got 4 million people in bondage, right? And we can value those people. They were the most liquid asset in the country. There was a price if you were old. There was a price if you were young. There was a price if you were male or female, able-bodied or not. And economists have looked at this, and the value is so large that you actually have to measure it either in terms of national income, GDP, or total national wealth. So the estimates are that their equivalent value is between 16 and 20% of US wealth, or 1 to 2 years of GDP. Now, if we think about that from today's perspective, if you valued it in terms of net wealth, we're talking about 15.5 trillion. Shawn, how did you come up with that number? National wealth is about $85 trillion. 16 to 20% of that is between 14 and 17 trillion. If you take an average, you're at 15.5. If you look at it from the perspective of national income, we said it's 1 to 2 years of GDP. GDP is roughly $19 trillion. That's between 19 and 38 trillion. You take an average, it's 28.5 trillion. That's valuing it in two different modes. One mode has it close to 16, the other close to 29. If you take an average of the two, as we often do, then we're talking about $22 trillion. Now the point here is this. No matter how you look at it, you are talking about massive, gargantuan, hard to conceive numbers. What is the economic implication of this, by the way? Does anybody know the net worth of 45 million African Americans? It's about 1.5 trillion. That's our net worth. That means, now we just said that the value of 4 million slaves 152 years ago was the equivalent today of 22 trillion. That means that 4 million people in bondage over 150 years ago was worth about 15 times more than what all 45 million of us, including everybody in this room, is worth today. Impact from slavery, 50 trillion. Now, you can say, listen, I knew it was bad. I didn't know it was that bad, right? But it did come to an end, right? And you had a fresh start, and it's been 150 years since then. So while that was bad, there's been plenty of time to do really well. Other people have done well, right? And I can say, yeah, you know, I hear what you're saying. But here's the problem. The problem is that people started with no economic resources. The value of African Americans in 1870 was actually 0.17% of US wealth. Now, there was some talk, we all heard about 40 acres and a mule, right? This, of course, never happened, right? We talked about it in Congress and so on and so forth. They didn't pass it. Here's the question. What would that be worth today? Right? So 40 acres in a mule, 40 acres, you got 4 million slaves, you're talking about 160 million acres. Now, I once looked at purchasing some land with a group of folks. It's like 400 acres. 400 acres, you need to go up in a helicopter. 160 million acres? Hard to conceive, right? Now, the price of an acre is roughly from like $3,020 to about $6,350 on the high end. So you're saying on the high end, that will be worth $1 trillion in today's dollars, generating $90 billion a year for economic activity. You guys ever heard of the Homestead Act? Junior high school, remember that? So what the Homestead Act is while they denied the distribution of this land to newly freed people, a couple years prior to that, about 1862, Congress passed an act that would distribute 246 million acres to 1.5 million white families over a 60-year period, right? So if we look at that from a valuation perspective, using the same numbers, that will be about $1.6 trillion of equivalent value today, or about $1 million a family. Now listen, I'm all about hard work and bootstrapping it. $1 million, it's hella bootstrap. Right? Now here's how it worked. You had the opportunity to claim about 160 acres. And if you were able to claim it, you just had to stay on it for 5 years, and then you could take possession of it. Right? Now, if you were an immigrant, not only could you take possession of it after 5 years, but 5 years was also the amount of time it took for you to naturalize back in the day. which means you can literally come here with nothing but the shirt on your back and leave with $1 million equivalent of economic opportunity. Research says that there are 93 million white Americans that are direct beneficiaries. Not secondary, not tertiary, not related in kind of, sort of, some kind of way. Direct beneficiaries of this massive government giveaway. So you're talking about $1 trillion denied. That will be startup capital. Now, while $1 trillion sounds like a lot, remember, it's just 2% of the $50 trillion that was extracted from them and their ancestors. That was denied, but 1.6 trillion was distributed. Now, if you fast forward a little bit, you've got the Civil War has occurred. The Southern economy is devastated. Global cotton market is devastated. Confiscated land has been given back to the white planter class. There is a massive need for abundant, cheap labor. Now, by the way, I just fast forwarded across a bunch of stuff, right? So it's actually really important. So I'm going to double back here just to emphasize this point. It's a really big deal. Cotton is the first global industry, right? It is 61% of U.S. exports. We dominate 80% of the global market. There are 20 million people employed in this industry worldwide. 1 million of those people lose their jobs as a result of the Civil War. It's a big deal. It affects India. It affects Egypt. It affects Europe. It affects Russia. It affects Japan. It affects everybody. It's called a global cotton famine. So the world is crying out, what will America do to put her newly freed people back to work? And the answer to that is something called Jim Crow. Now, Jim Crow is like the least descriptive name I have ever come across. It's like the Shawn Rochester period. Like how I communicated all that? What does that mean? Like, what's a Jim Crow? Who the hell's Jim Crow, right? But Jim Crow is a system of laws and customs reinforced with an extraordinary level of violence to reinstitute or reimpose a 100% tax on the labor of the sharecropper. Now, I know what you're going to say. Shawn, look, I hear you. I know these people were poor, but you're talking this 100% tax. Sounds a little hyperbolic, right? And I'm like, listen, I'll let you decide if it's 100% tax, right? Let's kind of talk about it. So what underpins Jim Crow is the sharecropping system. And sharecropping is actually like a contract, right? The terms and conditions of those contracts, obviously, are set by the white planter. Now, what you have to remember is, or the way that it worked was, the big mega plantations were broken up into small lots. Families would settle on those lots. They would agree to plant cash crops, and then they would bring those crops to market, and then they would share in a portion of the crop, sharecrop it, right? But here's the thing. The crop doesn't come tomorrow. It comes at the end of the season or the end of the year. They have no economic resources, which means that that white planter has to spot you the seed and the tools and the fertilizer and clothes and food and shelter at rates up to 70% a year. That means that they set your cost structure, right? And when you bring those things to harvest and you take it to the market is the white planter. He tells you what it's worth, which means that he controls your income or revenue. And if someone controls your cost structure, your expenses, and they control your revenue, that means that they control your profit. I think you see where I'm going with this 100% tax. Now, if you're fortunate, you're going to net to zero, earn nothing. If you're unfortunate, because they don't want you to go someone else that might be more generous, they're going to make sure that your profit is negative, that you owe them. And they're going to roll that into next year. And that's called perpetual debt servitude. Now, I know what you're thinking. Shawn, that's a bad deal. Um, I'm not going to do it. You like apples, how you like them apples, right? And I'm like, I hear you. I agree with you. It's a bad deal. I wouldn't want to do it either. The problem is there is a law for that. And those laws are called vagrancy laws. And those laws say that if you cannot prove that you are a landowner, or you cannot prove that you are gainfully employed, you can be charged with a criminal offense and put in a state or county jail. Now I hear you, and you're like, I didn't know about that. Right? Well, I'll tell you what, I'll sign the contract, but I still ain't doing it. Right? I'm not feeling it. And I'm like, I hear you. But they got a law for that. And those laws are called contract enforcement laws, which means you sign that contract. And if you break that contract, they can charge you with a criminal offense and put you in a state or county jail. I see that look on your face. I know what you're going to say. Shawn, I'm going to sit in jail. They're going to feed me 3 square meals a day till they get tired and they're going to let me out. And I'm like, I hear you. But they got something for that. And that's called convict leasing, which means they're going to lease you back to that same farmer that you don't want to work for, or to a private corporation. Now, there's one thing I want you to know if you take that option. There's one aspect of convict leasing that you can argue is actually worse than slavery in this respect. While a slave owner will kill you and beat you within an inch of your life, they have what's called an interest in your residual value. They would like for you to actually be around for another 5 or 10 years or 20 years to maximize the return on their investment. Slaves are expensive. But under a convict leasing, they have no interest in your residual value. They only care about you for the 8, 18, 24 months that you are with them. Your life beyond that is of no interest. So you got mortality rates, death rates, up to almost 50%, which means you have a 1 in 2 chance of death. Now, I need you to understand that this thing is ridiculously lucrative. 1914, 20% of the state of Alabama's revenues are coming from convict leasing. You're a small white farmer, you can't afford a slave, you could just buy a part of them. 6 months, 18 months. Enormously profitable. Now, here's the thing. It's not a bad 2-year period or 3-year or 5-year or even 10-year period. This is going on for 75 years. And during that period, 4,000 black people that we know of were lynched. That is publicly executed by their fellow citizens. That is the equivalent, if you do the math, of 1 black person per week being executed in public for 75 years. Under those circumstances, you're going to get the hint. Your family's going to get the hint. Your community is going to get the hint. Everybody's going to get the hint. No one was prosecuted for any of that. There is a sharecropper in the Mississippi Delta that said this. I've been working these deltas for 30 years, and I know that every year I've been robbed. But what can I do? I speak up, I get cussed. I raise up, I get shot. And that ends that. So I think you see where the 100% tax on your labor comes in. And if it is 100% tax, that means that by definition it is slavery. Which is why people call it slavery by another name. The effect is the same. And if over the period of 250 years, 50 trillion was extracted, and this was a period of 75 additional years, which is a third longer, you could argue that an additional 15 trillion was extracted over that period of time. 65 years later, after emancipation, you still have 4 million black people in the fields. Now, think about the implication of that. On emancipation, they lose 22 trillion. Boom. Overnight. But over the next 75 years, they would claw back 15 trillion of that from the descendants of those people. Jim Crow. Now, some people say, listen, I get it, I hear you. That's deep. But in truth, it didn't affect everyone. There were some people who weren't under that system, right? Some people got an education. 2 boys went to Harvard during that time. What about those folks? And I'm like, yeah, I hear you, I agree, I get it. Education is the great equalizer. So we can talk about it. You know, but what you have to understand is the context, right? Because after emancipation, you have white farmers, small farmers, asking for the expansion of public education. You have newly freed people asking for it themselves and their children, right? The white planter class has no need of it. They educate their children privately, and what they need is cheap and abundant labor. But they need the help of the small white farmers. So they decide to expand public education. But the deal is that they will divert funds from black students to white students. Now, W.E.B. Du Bois says that in the 40 years since emancipation, Negro taxes and the Negro's share of income from indirect taxes and endowments have fully repaid any investment that the white establishment put into educating black people. That's how effective the rerouting of those funds was. 1914, William H. Baldwin is the president of the General Education Board, kind of like the Department of Education at the federal level. And these are his words. The South needed Negroes educated so they could be the best possible laborers. With the right kind of education, Negroes will willingly work menial jobs, and that will open up opportunities for Southern whites to work the more expert labor. Strategy being executed, funds being invested to bring this strategy to bear. By 1917, there are only 64 public high schools for black students across the South. Not a town, not a district, not a state, the South. Most schools are built and owned by black people. It's actually 44% of them. And the remaining, most of those were built by black people and deeded to the state for recognition and to get funds. Double taxation. Now, if you're in New York City, in 1920, New York's public school system is spending 50 times more per student than South Carolina is spending on black students in a segregated system. 50 times more. Not 5 times more, 50 times more. That means that you are an immigrant and you're coming here with nothing but the shirt on your back and you sell in New York, you and your children are getting 50 times more invested in your human capital development than a black student in South Carolina whose parents and predecessors have been here for hundreds of years. By the way, in 1920, New York City is 97% white. In the South, for every dollar invested in a black student, 5 to 8 are invested in a white student. If you do that with your own family, one of your children is going to Harvard, the other is going to be impoverished. Black teachers in the South are being paid 25 to 34 cents on the dollar. But what a white teacher is being paid, white students are receiving 50% more years of education than black students by age 25. The maldistribution of economic resources is so significant that researchers say that if black students were actually given equal resources, just invest in the children the same, keep all the other discrimination constant, and it would have closed the wage gap by up to 50%. Not a child, millions of them. Right? And we're talking about over a 90-year period. A generation, that's over $600 billion economic loss. over that period of time, almost 100 years, you're talking close to $3 trillion. Impact, education, 3 trillion. Now you can say, look, I hear you, but back in the day, you really didn't need education. We all got a story about a great-grandfather or grandfather had fifth grade education, worked really hard, did well, built a home, all kinds of wonderful things, right? So, and housing is the great wealth builder, which is very true. It is 64% of the net worth of black people on average. It is a big deal and super critically important. And the country cares deeply about home ownership. The federal government invested $120 billion to subsidize home mortgages. Big deal. It's like $1 trillion today. Problem with that is less than 2% of that went to black people. However, over 20 million European immigrants that came during that time, once they naturalized, had access to all those resources. So, FHA, we all know about redlining. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that. Basically, the federal government invented the mortgage as we know it. They guaranteed the payments to take risk away from the bank. The bank allowed people to put down less money and to take a long time, 30 years, to pay it off. You can do that when the most powerful entity in the world is guaranteeing it. They would not lend to black people. Federal policy. And they would not do it, certainly, if black people wanted to buy into white communities, because they feared that it would lead to neighborhood instability. Now you can say, look, you bypass the federal government, you go to your local friendly bank, just work one-on-one with those folks. They did not lend to black people either. And if you found someone who was interested in doing so, the federal government would not underwrite their loans. You can say, well, I'm going to go to the builder. Work with them. Builders would not sell to black people. And those that chose to do it risked jeopardizing their financing, which was subsidized by the federal government. Now you can say, look, I'm going to go to realtors and work it out. They refuse to participate in transactions with black people buying homes in white communities. And if you say, I'm going to go to my fellow citizen and work it out, your fellow citizens sign covenants among themselves saying that if they were to sell and leave the community, they will only sell to another person of European descent. Now, sounds, very qualitative, right? They talk a whole lot of numbers. The numbers in the book, right? But what we can say quite definitively is that between 1930 and 1960, a lot less than 1% of all mortgages issued in America went to African Americans. 64% of your wealth portfolio. Now, if you cannot get housing, a mortgage, does that mean you don't want a house? No, you still want a house. So what do? You turn to the private markets under something called contract sale. You guys may have heard of this. You have some of this going on right now, actually. So in the private market, there are no appraisals required. So homes are selling at 2x the price. Interest rates are draconian. And as bad as that sounds, that's not even a bad thing. The bad thing is that while you're making payments, you don't earn any equity. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. So if I'm buying a house from you on a contract sale, and we agree that I'm going to make 100 installment payments, with me? And I make 99 of those and miss the 100th, you get to keep all 99 and my down payment, take the house back, evict me, and sell to somebody else. How does someone build wealth under these situations? How do you accumulate capital? Now you can say, look, just take your time. It'll blow over. Head down to the grindstone. You know what I mean? And when the discrimination passes, you'll be able to save your money and whatnot. Here's an interesting thing. Rent in black communities, formerly called ghettos, right, were more than 50% higher than outside the ghetto. You know why that is? Because over that period of time, you've got between 4 and 6 million black people leaving the South, coming into northern cities, and being corralled into one tight spot. Demand for housing is going way up. The amount of housing is not. Price is astronomical. You could say, look, just work hard. Researchers say labor market discrimination, if you look at it in 1983 dollars, was 1.6 trillion. If you convert that to today's dollars, you're over 4 trillion. Difficult to build wealth. Housing and the labor market. We're not going to have time to go into detail or to talk about the New Deal and the GI Bill. Just know that's about 1.2 trillion in today's equivalent. We're not going to have time to go into like the expenditures on the interstate highway, which is a massive history in and of itself, because they ran a lot of these directly through black communities, right? Many thriving black communities. We won't have time to go into 1965 to the present, which is very, very interesting, right? But there's 3 trillion associated with that. Where are we now? So our income, business and consumer, is 1.5 trillion less than it otherwise should be. 1 trillion of that is associated with business income. Remember I told you we are missing 1.4 million businesses, right? We have over 8 trillion less in net worth, which means we should be worth a lot more than we're currently worth right now as a proportion of us as a population. You already know, and we talked about the missing jobs and businesses. And then the research, I kept seeing this number showing up again and again and again. And you'll see it in the book, it's 2%. And it's like areas that are really critical for wealth accumulation, we tend to be hovering around 2%. So 2%, less than 2% of corporate supply chain spend, which is a big deal, goes to black enterprise. Less than 2% of government supply chain spend goes to black enterprise. Notice I said black enterprise and not minority enterprise. I got you. Less than 2% of our own spend, by the way, goes to our own enterprises. Our deposits. Oh, typically, high income, high growth fields, we tend to be represented less than 2% in those fields. Super critical to wealth accumulation. Our deposits, same thing. Actually, SBA loans, less than 2% is way less than 2%. Less than 1%. Right? Actually, $4 out of every $10,000 in the US banking system is in a black bank. 4 out of every 10,000. All of this creates massive negative, depressive impact on job creation and business development, right? So what I'm going to do is kind of pause here so we can open up for some questions. We can talk about solutions, which is this PhD economic framework. We can talk about the fact that minority does not mean black, right? And also talk about just any questions that you guys have. So I'm going to pause here. Now conclude the presentation. So let me, if I may, talk about what this PhD thing is, right? And why it's really critical. So PhD is a framework, and it just means you do everything within this framework. The idea and the purpose of it is to create jobs, to create business, and expand business in the black community. It can be done by anyone. It is not limited to just black people. How you measure progress is through jobs and businesses created and businesses expanded. If you're doing that, it's progress. If you're not doing that, it's not progress. If your allies and whoever believes in economic advancement, they should be doing PhD. So let me talk about it in the piece parts and look at it, how it all fits together. So the P is, again, it's purchase, hire, and deposit in ways that create jobs, create business, and expand businesses in the black community. The P is purchase, right? So from a consumer point, that is our personal spend. We have 100% control over that. We can spend on whatever we want. There's a lot of things we don't have control over, but our spend, we do. Right? And we spend, I think we know we earn about 1.2 trillion number that's thrown around. What most people don't know is about 24 million jobs in the US economy is tied to that spend. People don't talk about that. Unfortunately, less than 2% of that spend is done on black enterprise. If you are a corporation, if you are a business, if you are an organization, the P for you is your supply chain spend. It's the businesses that businesses do business with, right? And we've already seen that in a supply chain spend, we're at less than 2% across corporations. The federal government alone is $600 billion a year. Small changes in that can have massive, massive impact, right? The H is higher. Are we represented on the payroll of businesses that we do businesses with? Are we represented on the payroll of businesses that say we love and we support and we encourage things that are happening in our community? The answer is yes or no, and if it's no, it's do you have a plan that you're executing to and tracking on? The D is deposit. So we talked about this, right? We don't put our money in black banks. We don't. Now, most people don't know that we have well over $100 billion in non-black banks. It's over $130 billion. We put very little in black banks. Maybe it's like 4.5, 4.7. I remember having a conversation with someone from another country who said, I know people who have that much. And all of you put that in your banks, right? It's critical. What do banks do? They lend, they provide credit. Black enterprise banks are lending to businesses and consumers, right? Black businesses right now have upwards of $9 billion of credit that they need and are not getting. We could easily provide that. If we put our money in these banks, like if we moved it en masse, they would not have the infrastructure nor the people to handle it, which is the beauty of this whole thing, which means that you have to hire. They would have to hire 30,000 people direct on payroll, and it would stimulate the creation of another 70,000 in the supply chain to support it. It's massive. Who are they going to hire? They hire us. Network effect. The typical black enterprise is about 75-ish% black, about 25% non-black, which means by definition, we are the most diverse businesses on planet Earth. It's a win-win and win, right? Now, people have you guys ever heard of the money multiplier effect? So if you have a deep, well-functioning banking system, for every dollar you put in, it gets relent again and again and again. It has a $10 impact, right, in the financial system. We can walk through the math of how that works, but it's a 10x impact. For that to happen, we actually have to practice PhD, right? PhD is purchasing, hiring, and depositing in ways that are creating jobs and businesses in our community. Really, it's the very thing that we admire most about other communities, about our Asian brothers and sisters, right? Our Latino brothers and sisters, our Jewish brothers and sisters, right? This is what they do. I'm just giving it a name, right? When you hear about the velocity of money, some communities it's going for 28 days, some 77 days. Our community is going for a few minutes. By the way, people never tell you how to calculate this stuff, right? But what they are describing is the impact of actually doing PhD. It works when we do it. When your business has the account with a black bank as well as your employees. It's incredibly powerful. Now, I want to talk a little bit, and I talk about this everywhere I talk, especially major corporations, about this notion that minority does not mean black. Okay? So let me give you a couple of examples. And this is really, really important, especially like in the supply chain, because the supply chain is a job creator of epic proportions. Who you do business with and doing business with black enterprise is a massive job creator. But here's the problem. So people can say, look, we're going to create these minority programs. And they use words like minority and inclusion and diversity, right? We heard those things? Let me tell you what that means. Typically, it's a euphemism for not white male. That is 90% of people on planet Earth. It's an amazingly general way to describe a very specific problem. Now, you can say, listen, what we're going to do is we're going to invest in doing more business with women-owned businesses who have employees. And that's dope. Love it. Double, triple down on it. They actually generate $1.2 trillion a year. Big deal. But if you go under the sheets a little bit and you ask the question, how much of that is from black women? It's less than 2%. That's what I'm interested in. So that means it's not until the 99th dollar that a sister sees a benefit from that investment. Now, if you say, listen, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do more business with our Hispanic and Latino brothers and sisters. Love it. Double down on it. Triple down on it. Dope. They generate about $380 billion a year. The ones that have employees. Big deal. But if you ask the same question, right? How much of that is being generated by black Latinos and Hispanic? It's less than 2%. Again, it's not until the 99th dollar that a Latino brother or sister is going to see a benefit. If you say you're going to do it by investing in our Asian brothers and sisters, again, I love it. Double, triple down on it. Make it happen. By definition, there are no black people there. So if you look at that entire group, black revenue is only about 9%. If you add women into it, it's about 4%. The vast majority of any minority spend is not going to black enterprise. Numerically and definitively. Period. End of story. Now, people have the right heart. You know what I'm saying? They have the right intention. The outcome that they're looking for is just not going to come from what they're doing. And it's important that people know this, which is why I say you have to be specific. And what happens is we generalize. So I'll pause there because I wanted to make those 2 points. And we can just open it up for questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, Thomas Lopez Pierre, candidate for Manhattan Borough President. My question is, we have all these black elected officials in the state of New York, and here in the city, our controller, Scott Stringer, has stated that $16 billion of the cities spend $16 billion on procurement, city dollars, and less than 5% is spent with Hispanics, blacks, and women. So my question is, if we have all these powerful, important elected officials, why is it that white males are getting 95% of the city of New York's procurement dollars when we make up 51% of the population, blacks and Hispanics? I'm just curious about that. Do you know?
I think there's a couple things that we have to consider. The first is, I didn't talk in this conversation about the level of bias that exists. I talked very specifically about levels of anti-black bias that exists in the country and the electorate. Levels are really, really high, right? And resources are distributed through like a path of least resistance. You know what path has the most resistance? The more melanin you have in your skin. Black folks at the bottom of that, less melanin, you're stacked up. Path of easiest resistance is to white males. There is no point of discrimination, and they have an extraordinary level of capital. They do not have structural problems. And then they have the networking and social aspects of it. When it comes to doing business with black enterprise, Latino, Hispanic enterprise, and so on and so forth, we tend to run into the problem of capital and scaling. Remember, only 4% of our businesses have employees. That means that 96% are not doing contracts with anybody. You're a mom and pop. You're not doing business, right? The issue becomes, now you have a barrier to entry. Do they have a clip level? I don't know. Do they have a clip level? It could be that they're looking to do business with enterprises that are 15 million and over. We can run the numbers on how many black enterprises will fit into that, right? So you have a structural problem. It's easy to say no, that you don't meet the requirement, what it's important that those individuals that make those decisions and others know is there are historical reasons why that is the case. Right now, people are A, not seeing the problem, remember I talked about this earlier, or B, thinking we're the problem. Why I got to pay for you? I work hard. Why don't you just work hard? When I work hard, good things happen. Why don't you work hard? Right? A lot of what kind of happens from these presentations, the reading of the book, the conversations, is people are like, wow, they didn't know. They never understood the pathology. We all exposed to the same curriculum. Where are you going to learn this? You're not going to learn it in church. You're not going to learn it in K through 12. You're not going to learn it at university unless you stumble into like a black history class, and then you're going to get a lot on a very well-defined subject. This is cumulative. The power in it, right? What we need to start people to understand is to understand the power of the environment that was created to deliver these outcomes. It's different when you think it's the individual, because now you can justify leaving them or discriminating against them. When you understand the power in import, and particularly when we understand, we've trained, in my view, with a Hollywood view, which is if it was me, in 30 minutes I can solve that problem, and I will be out of it. Now you can see when I described the Jim Crow, I described it in a way that foreclosed every option in your mind to think you could get out of it. It is different when people are exposed to that, to understand like, good Lord, because they're saying, listen, my grandpa came here with nothing. And I'm saying, your grandpa could have come here with nothing. True, we got to honor that. But he may have received 50 times more economic resources and at New York City public education, because most people came through Ellis Island. He may have gotten access to all of these various programs that other people were denied, and most people don't know that people were denied stuff, right? So part of what I think is really important is people talking from the same fact set, the same level of understanding. Because when we start these conversations, everybody's super well entrenched in their positions. Ridiculous levels of passion, very little information, even less context, right? So I think they're operating on what I kind of call the current mode or the pre-black tax. They're operating off of what they believe to be the situation. And the situation is, it is these people who are taking and receiving and not delivering. And now I have to subsidize them. I, who have never been subsidized in my life, nor anyone before me, right? So when people have that context, I think it makes these conversations easier. The second thing I think needs to happen is the electorate. The people need to start asking for that. You can't ask people to step in harm's way if you're not going to have their back. Demand it. Ask for it. You ask about black people, they're going to tell you about minority stuff. Be specific. They will say, I have to go get it because such and such are asking for it, and it's important. Right? Yes.
Hi, Beatrice Ibis. I'm a Harlem-based developer. This morning has changed my day, so thanks to you and thanks to HBA. The topic of the day is disruption. You made a great point about capital. As a real estate developer, I'm all about capital. What are the opportunities created by the tech boom that we're in, or the tech transition that we're in, to create a disruption of this 300-year history? You cannot compete with Chase for storefront banking. Online banking levels the playing field. So how can we use technology to create a disruption in the black tax?
Great question.
So the question is, how do we use technology to leapfrog hundreds of years of disenfranchisement? And there's two things. One, we can use it, right? It greatly lowers the barrier and the costs. The current business model is outdated, right? The whole banking down the street and local. The truth of the matter is, the money ain't local, right? The money's in other places. Like I know people who got $300,000-$400,000 in their checking account. Really bad investment, but they have it, and it ain't in a black bank, right? So you can use technology to make it easy and seamless. But here's what I'm trying to do, and I want us all to do together. We have to be careful with this one thing. Yes, there is a shortage of black enterprise, disruptive enterprise, and others, right? That is what you call the supply side issue. But I think there's a bigger issue. And the bigger issue is the demand side issue, right? Because we can all create these businesses. Are we going to do business with us? Because the fact of the matter is that we have two black taxes. One that's external, that's imposed on us, and one that's internal that we impose on ourselves. The way we show, the way we discriminate against each other, the way we exhibit our bias, because we have the same bias against us that others have, is through commerce. We do not do business with each other. Now, I am not being hyperbolic. That is not who I am. That is not what I do. Less than 2%. That means 98% is spent on something else. Last time I checked, 98% was excellent. Almost perfect. Our current desire to do business with other folks is at a level of excellence. That is the first thing that we have to change. The demand to do business with each other. Because the capital will follow that, right? So we can create the disruption, and it is necessary, but we also have to have the desire to move the resources into that platform. And we need to have a critical mass of that to go along with it. What the disruption does, in my opinion, is it lowers the cost, and it facilitates the ease of transition. Because we like convenience, and we don't want to work hard, and we don't want to go out of our way, so on and so forth, right? But the first issue has to be dealt with, the paradigm shift. And that's really what the book is about. It was designed to be the most powerful case that can be made to commercialize, and notice I did not say support, to commercialize black enterprise. Our nomenclature is wrong. Support? The foundation supports you. You don't support the foundation. That's a charitable mindset. Why would you apply a charitable mindset to a business transaction? We don't think about supporting Prada and Fendi and whatever else. We think about that as a fair exchange. The mindset is wrong. We need to do business with, right? So hopefully that answers the question. What I'm trying to tee up is the demand so that these disruptive things can be put in place, and then we can put our financial capital and our brain power, of which we have a lot, behind it. Sorry about that.
Thank you, by the way. That was an excellent presentation, very informative. Thank you for coming out. Thank the HBA. Great job again. What you say is, 100%. I don't think anybody would agree with one thing that was said today. But disagree, sorry. But one of the points that you brought up is there's an education component to this, which is that of the information you put up, I would say even in the black community, people aren't aware of it. So I guess one question is, how do we provide that education when nobody wants the information's out there. Obviously, your book is there. There are other books. People who want to seek that information will find the information. Unfortunately, most people aren't looking for that information because it's so much easier just to say, well, it's their fault why they're here, instead of saying, well, why does that happen? But the second part of my question is, so the first part is education component. How do we provide that education or disperse that education? And the second part is, what seems to be happening now is that we have this Asian model minority, which that's being kind of thrown in our face too. We see that with this Harvard case, which is that, well, they came here with nothing. So how they did this, how come you can't do it? We're seeing that all over the education system because they're expelled. Well, and obviously they don't have that same burden as you aptly presented in this presentation. But when you just look at it on the surface level, they're saying, well, they're succeeding at this level and you guys aren't, so obviously it's your fault. Whereas you made a great point where, we're not stupid. Obviously there's more to this, and anyone who wants to see that would see it. But I guess it goes back to the same question: how do we expose the greater problem, which is an education problem, and why this problem exists?
So there's kind of two parts there. How do you amplify the message? How do you amplify the message, right? And then talking about other minorities and things of that nature. So how you amplify the message is, I always say, start with you. Like I'm one of the few fortunate authors where people buy like 10, 20 of my books and give it to everybody they know because they're just blown away by it. And it's not anywhere, right? There's a lot of people out there. I don't know people who are talking about the economic impact of discrimination. Period, end of story. You can add whatever degree you want to their name. You see these conversations they're having on TV. It's qualitative and it's ineffective. Nobody cares about your feelings, right? So the first thing is start with you, buy the book, share it, right? The second thing is talk to, like we're trying to introduce the book into the school system in New Jersey, because they have a law in place that says you need to introduce Black history, right? So we're going through that. Those are things that can be worked on here, right? We're having conversations about using media, right, to be able to project it. The message actually resonates with a lot of folks. It surprises people. Like, when I was talking at Google, there's people talking about how to put Google money in Black banks. And they're not Black people, right? The message is powerful. So, like, I got an army of folks here now, and then people who will be watching this in the future, buy the book, share the message with your contacts, media. One thing I think is super critical is that this needs to be in our churches as curriculum. Our churches touch everybody, right? Our churches were en masse highly engaged in the education and the training of newly free people, highly engaged, the equivalent of billions of dollars, right? They touch everyone. This can be part of that. At the end of the day, we need to be focusing on creating these jobs and businesses. The other thing is, and by the way, if you have the book, you read through it, you can talk with, elegantly pick apart anybody, anywhere. So the issue of like our Asian brothers and sisters, right? And here's the thing that's very important to have this in place. Nobody has our experience. Honor theirs, I respect it. It is not our experience. Let me tell you what research says about Asian progress. They have high demand for and appreciation for education. That is not unique. We've had that for 150 years and 200 years before that. What we have had is not being able to execute that. No one says you can't go to Harvard, and no one says that I will kill you if you do that. And not a soul will do anything about it. The other piece that research says is the level of discrimination has been falling against Asians over time. That's how you accumulate wealth. It's a function of the level of discrimination that you face. The level of discrimination against Black people is falling at the lowest rate. The second thing is they get to bring their wealth with them and bring their financial capital with them, to bring their intellectual capital with them, and to set up networks. We were never allowed to do that through immigration policy. We were never allowed to do it while we were here. And our networks were intentionally, forcefully disruptive. No one has had that experience. Now, I honor theirs. I respect it. I appreciate it. And every other group, it's important that they honor, understand, respect, and appreciate ours. There's a difference when you say, I haven't eaten for 5 days. You may be starving. You're definitely in the ketonic phase. But that's not the same as a person who says, I haven't eaten in 55 days. The problem is, people say, well, we both hungry. The solution for the person who hasn't eaten for 5 days is totally different than the person who hasn't eaten for 55. And it's that difference that is never taken into account. If you have someone go farm in that rich, beautiful soil in Iowa, they're gonna get bountiful yield, right? If you have someone go farm in an arid condition, they're gonna have a very poor yield. You can give them the best tools and the best seed and the best techniques. The environment is not conducive for it. It doesn't have the moisture content. It doesn't have the mineral content. The environment, the temperature isn't right for the production. But if you don't take environment into account, you're gonna say that's a crappy farmer. And you're gonna say, this guy's amazing. You give me 1 bushel, he's giving me 15. You go work miracles, come back with 3 bushels, 3x that joint, and he's just like, I told you I need 15. He doesn't even recognize the miracle associated. Part of it is having people understand. These folks that are here, that have come here from Asian countries recently, they don't know anything about this. What they know is the same thing we're all told in the media. We're aggressive, over-sexualized, we don't work hard, we're not great at X, Y, and Z. Those are the perceptions that are projected worldwide. They come here and they see the same thing. There's no critical analysis that's done. I come here, I see a person on the street. They don't ask, how did that come to be? And that's part of what needs to happen. You need to have this conversation. It needs to be a prerequisite before we're talking about anything else. It's absurd to be having this conversation about them going and talking about black people in Harvard. Have anyone talked about the bias levels? Because every single one person, up to 8 in 10 Americans, 75% have an anti-black bias or an automatic white preference. Why is it they're not asking the question about the whites who are there that shouldn't be there in their view? There's very few of us at these IB institutions, very few, dominated by everybody else. The probability of people being there that shouldn't be there, according to whatever metric they're using, is much higher in every other group. The question doesn't even arise because the presumption is, that's why it's called a bias, it's a systematic error. You're wrong in the same direction every time. You're not wrong random, right? That's why it makes sense. And 85% of the electorate doesn't agree that race should have anything to do with college admissions. Race has everything to do with it now. Anyway, I could go deeper into that, but I think I've answered that question. Let me go over here.
Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. I'm certainly going to purchase the book. My name is Jason Murray, and I've been in the financial service industry for more than 10 years. And when I go to conferences, I'm definitely, a small percentage of African Americans at those conferences. Mm-hmm. In your research, is there any, basis as to why there's a lot of resistance for other African Americans to want to get into financial services on the investment side? I know you've been talking about put your money in banks and so forth. You hadn't necessarily talked about putting your money in African American investment organizations. And, certainly I believe there's a lot of resistance for African Americans wanting to become financial advisors or CFPs. If you can talk to that, I'd greatly appreciate it.
My observation, I can't speak to that. That's not what I've observed. What I've observed is resistance to us wanting to do business with our own advisors and with our own financial institutions, whether it's a bank or it's an investment fund or anything else. I mean, you could have conversations with black entrepreneurs, right? And they will share it with you chapter and verse. So in terms of less than 2% of all financial advisors are black, right? It's very, very small. I think part of the problem is you don't have also like the concentration to begin with is small. A lot of people choose things that they become exposed to, right? Like you want to be a nurse, aunt, so on and so forth was a nurse. That's a big thing. The presence of those folks is fairly limited, but you also have, significant bias. Like I put my money in black financial institutions, right? I actually live this, you know what I'm saying? Like, so let me just pause and be specific. And I want to talk about like how this PhD is playing out in terms of what I do. You know what I'm saying? So like, I'll give you a couple examples. So when we purchased our home, we looked for a black broker, right? I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't want to pay them fees. I don't like those fees. I don't want to pay those fees. But if I got to pay those fees, I'm making sure that one of us are getting paid in the middle of it, right? I live in a majority white community. My doctor's black. My eye doctor's black. You even was like, how this dude? And we were 1%ers up there, right? So when possible, where possible, we engage. When I created the book, like I didn't just write it, like we published it. Like I put the team together, like all the editors, all the web designers. I have a whole online education associated with that. That was produced in Atlanta by a sister. Like when possible, where possible, we deployed a lot of resources to do this. And we use high quality black talent when we're doing it. And you gotta go on a search, but high quality tends to know high quality, right? So the cars that I have, by the way, my dealer is here, right? Jerry Walton, right here, right? Hudson Valley BMW. We buy all our cars there, right? Good and amazing brother. Now, we spend close to $100 billion a year on cars, more than we spend on houses. We don't spend any money with black dealers. Think about the kind of jobs that these guys have. Yep, something ever went wrong with your car? Is it cheap? Right? It's not the same as very low paying jobs, right? You're stimulating that demand in your community. When possible, where possible, that's what you do, right? That's the crew that you're a part of. You know what I mean? When it comes to like high net worth clients, like we work with Seth Thomas, right? How many people do you know that can manage millions of dollars and has the infrastructure to be able to do that in a competent way? Look at what's happening with our athletes and entertainers. They're economic pass-throughs, right? Now, even simple things, like I know y'all been sweating my kicks, right? I know it. It's tight as hell. It's by design, right? But these are from a black designer who's right here in Harlem, by the way. You see how I threw that in? You see how I threw that in? Right? Right here in Harlem. So it's like when possible, where possible. When we have to deploy resources, we look for high quality black talent to do it, to be able to create those jobs, right? So that's what we have to do. People go to economic empowerment conferences in a car they didn't buy from a black dealer. You mandated by law to have insurance. You ain't got no choice. You get to choose who you want to do business with. You know what I'm saying? Who you gonna finance the car with. All those are fees that are being driven. If we shifted and used our own realtors, we'd need to create 14 more thousand realtors to handle it. Existing demand, not new stuff. And I'm not even talking about the lawyers that go along with it, right? And all of the individuals that are part of like the closing fees and whatnot. That's $5 billion a year associated with those fees. It's another 20,000 jobs created. This stuff is really important. And I don't need anybody's permission to do that. And neither do you. Who's your accountant? Who's your financial advisor? Right? That's what we need to do. The point here is this. It's to find high quality black talent and then oversubscribe it. Because when they can't meet the demand, they have to hire. And that's how jobs are created. And that's how businesses are expanded. Two more? So we'll do like, you go next.
Hi, my name is Bob Ponce. I'm a Harlem-based entrepreneur and business consultant. First of all, personally, I have to thank you for that presentation. It was, I think, moving for everybody. For me, it was very personally moving because I got the chance to see where my blessing came from. I had a grandmother who got a mortgage on a brownstone in Harlem in 1924. Wow. So when I saw those figures and came to understand that she was less than 1% because she was before that period you had that started in 1930, yep. And that created the opportunity for my father to go to City College and create the opportunity for me to go into life in the middle class and be able to get an Ivy League college education. So I saw that created that path, her being in what was 1% for us created an opportunity for me.
Yep.
And so I wanted to just thank you for that personally. What I wanted to say is that it's important that we look at this information in the context of the new economy that we're dealing with. And when you mention technology, I prefer for us to look at the new economy, because we've got to look beyond the machine parts and what's really happening. We're going into an era where jobs are disappearing because of technology. And so it's of primary importance that we not only create businesses, but be able to think of ourselves as business first and individual second. Corporations have more rights these days than people do.
Yep.
And so we really need to be teaching our children not just about getting an education, but about starting businesses. And so even I, who love and appreciate the value and education gave me, I can't in good faith say that for every young person that comes out, they should invest $400,000 in a BA degree and then not have an economic strategy when they could have put $400 in an online business and in the same 4 years be able to create more opportunity for themselves. And so I think we want to take your framework and we've got to look at that in the larger sense, because disruption is not just happening to our community. The whites who support Trump are going to get disrupted just as badly as we do, probably worse, because they think everything is good right now. So there's an opportunity over the next 5 to 10 years that we can take quantum leaps forward, but only if we look at these solutions that you're talking about, only if we start our own businesses and circulate that money around our own businesses. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. What I'll say very briefly is I'm a big fan of both and. Right? We need to be on top of the new economy, and we need to also not forget that these service jobs aren't going anywhere. Right? And there's certain jobs that aren't, your doctor is not going to be your nurse, right? Like, there are occupations that are high growth, high earning, and if we have like financial discipline on top of it, it can put ourselves in a very solid foundation. We have to be doing both. We have to be finding the new opportunities and helping people secure them, right? But we also have to be taking advantage of current opportunities as well. So we have
Damani Corbin here.
Well, we had Rashawn. Are you trying to ask a question? Oh, okay. All right. We'll have one more.
So this is just a quick promo. So I've read Shawn Rochester's book, and if you don't get a copy after today, you're doing yourself a huge disadvantage. But there's many folks that I've seen you speak a number of times, and the feedback that I've heard is that, hey, I've heard this, I want to act on this now. And that question hasn't been answered and probably won't. And if you can, I'd like you just to speak on Good Steward University, because I think that's an avenue that folks in the room can distribute to their community organizations, church organizations, through every organization who's working in corporate America have a diversity and inclusion group. That's something that you can take immediate impact on how we can get it out there. So if you don't mind, speak a little bit about a Good Steward University.
Yeah, so Good Steward University is our online platform. So we have the Black Tax online in 3 different parts. That's professionally produced and done. It's very dope. And people can access that anywhere on planet Earth by licenses, and many people do. We also have, a part of this strategy is what we call personal financial management. Other people call it financial literacy. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to go down this journey, you got to get your money right. And a lot of people have high incomes and no money. And the reason is not that they're bad people, we don't have the critical mass of that knowledge to be able to pass on. We're figuring all of this stuff out as we go. So we've created Good Steward University that lays out how to manage your financial resources, lays out budgeting in a dope way, because budgeting always feels like a hustle. It lays out credit in a phenomenal way. It lays out how to maximize your assets at retirement. We do a bunch of things with folks because you have to be on a trajectory. Like, very few people know right now, 28 years from now, what their net worth is going to be. The people who work with us know that. And when you know that, you tie all of your economic decisions to that. And that's the difference, right? So it's very, very powerful. You can get it at goodstewardliving.com. If you can't remember that, just type in ShawnRochester.com, straight, one word, and it'll take you there. It's powerful, it's impactful. We have to attack the wealth gap from multiple places. The black tax is about the paradigm shift and advocating to do business with black enterprise. But black enterprise needs strong customers, right? And our families need us to be in a strong financial position. And that means that we're focused on something I call the SOUL. SOUL stands for stewardship, ownership, and legacy, right? And what you learn there is that stewardship is about how to manage your limited resources to drive cash flow. No cash flow, no conversation. We're done here. How to use cash flow to maximize your level of ownership. And I mean free and clear. You know how people say, free at last, thank Lord Almighty, we're free at last? What we say at Good Steward University is free and clear. Free and clear. Thank the Lord Almighty, I'm free and clear. And we lay out the steps of how you go about doing that, and also how you maximize your assets at retirement. So many people leave such huge opportunities on the table. You guys already know this. There's people who think of 401ks as an expense because it lowers how much money they will actually have, and not as a massive investment vehicle. You know what I mean? We lay all of these things out. And we do this because a massive problem that we have in our community is we don't have the balance sheet to be economically attractive to high quality financial advisors. They need you to be at 250, 500, 750 liquid, not your mortgage, not your 401k, liquid that they can invest, right? They don't have the time to do all this stuff. What we're doing is positioning people to be in that situation. So they have it, right? They have a soul mentality, and they can transmit that to their kids. And I also have a book that's already written that's coming out that lays that out, that complements the course. It's very, very powerful. It's not aspirational in any way, shape, or form, and it works in a very powerful and profound way. Thank you for that question, Damani. Rashawn.
So we
just take the last one first.
how are we doing on time? Is everyone okay? Are you, I mean, a couple more questions? Does that work? Okay,
Cool.
Go ahead.
I'm probably loud enough. So, I would just love for you.
Hey, I got it. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll also make a quick plug. You shouldn't just get the book, but please buy 3 so you can give it to people you know, and then ask them about it later. I bought about 30, and I know half of them haven't read it yet. And I'm like, you need to read that book. What I would love to know, because I've had conversations with people specifically about putting money in black banks. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. If you have $50,000 or $10,000, whatever it is, you can put a percentage in black banks, and that makes a difference. I even had to tell people, I mean, you do know they're FDIC insured, right? I mean, people worry about their money. I'm like, you asking ridiculous questions. You don't ask that about Chase, they're FDIC insured. But I would love to know from you, and I know you do a lot of this math in your head, I mean, we just want to get started, right? A lot of this isn't happening. Would you give a percentage of, like, if we put X amount of dollars in black banks, it would lead to this, and kind of have a stair-step approach? Are you able to kind of give some ideas and a framework here?
Yeah, I'll do kind of far and wide at the same time, right? What I would say is, if you're going to do it, do it. Don't be ceremonial and symbolic. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. There are people who have significant resources that put $500 in a black bank. I'm not talking about the person who that's what they have. I'm talking to people who have significantly more, right? That's ceremonial, and that's unhelpful. 50%, 10% of that is held for Federal Reserve requirements, and then the bank has $450, right, to lend out. It's not effective. Put a substantial amount of your resources, understanding that what the resources do is provide capital to businesses and for home purchases. Our black banks do not have the deposits to provide the lending that our businesses need. They do not. We have the deposits. We have over $130 billion, right? Very, very little of that, as we've talked about, is in the bank. So don't be ceremonial. If we as a people, and by the way, there's also an economic aspect of it, which is it costs the same to administer a $500 account or dollar account as it does a multi-$1,000 account. So when you do that and you can do more, it's just driving up their costs, right? So I would say, like, let's not be ceremonial. Let's put real resources in it. You don't have to close out your account. If you like your account down the street, fine. You know what I mean? We all have multiple different accounts in banks, so you can just transfer money across them, right? You can use the brick and mortar from the local place, but put real resources in the banks. When the banks have more deposits and they can do more lending, they can earn interest that increases their return on investment. That makes capital providers interested. Right now, their costs are high, their deposits are low, their lending ability is low, their return on their capital is low, and their costs are high, and they operate more, in my view, as philanthropies. They out there to help us. They out there like hustling and grinding with you. You know what I'm saying? Like working with you in ways that other people are not gonna work with you. Costs money to do that, right? And it's not attractive to capital providers. And they need that incremental capital investment to upgrade their infrastructure, to convert to the technology that the lady was talking about initially. So let me kind of say this about the banks. Like, what makes it very difficult for us is that we don't have an infrastructure to get the multiplier effect. Even black businesses don't do business with black businesses. We can do that, and we need to start with that, right? We need to put our deposits in the banks as well, so that they can actually have the multiplier effect, right? When people are moving into our communities, they should be putting money in the banks as well. Provides more capital for more businesses. It's how are we going to approach other communities to also participate in PhD? Again, it isn't just, it's for the benefit of black people and everybody else, but anybody could do PhD. Are we represented on your supply chain? Are we represented on your payroll? Are you depositing in institutions that provide capital for our businesses? If you're doing that, you're maximizing job creation, and that is a win for everybody. And I think it's the metric that we should use for progress. I'll tell you this quick final thing. Like a couple years ago, we had a lot of those protests after the summer of many police shootings, right, and murders. We had a lot of solidarity. I think it had like 25,000 people kind of marching hand in hand up and down kind of Fifth Avenue. It was a beautiful thing to behold, right? All kind of different people. You know what I saw? Like other people saw folks marching hand in hand, loving each other. And I'm all about that. That's dope. That's wonderful. Keep doing it. You know what I saw? I saw $3 billion walking up and down that street. That's what I saw. And not a nickel of that is going to now be spent. That's how you show the solidarity. And we have to communicate that with folks because they don't know, right? I love what these corporations are doing. Oh, we're going to stand up and we're going to show it. That's wonderful, right? But you got to do more than that. Don't just cut a check to the Boys and Girls Club. Do it, double, triple down on it, right? Don't just do that when you're sitting on a $15 billion supply chain. Do business with our businesses because that creates job opportunities, right? And the income supports families and families support communities, so on and so forth. We gotta attack this jobs gap and we gotta attack this wealth gap. And the way you do that is by executing PhD. That's what you have to ask your politicians for. What is your plan to drive job and business development creation in the black community? Right? They will default to general. Ask them what's the plan. What is the church doing? What is the school system doing? Right? We have to raise it as an issue. This is how you show progress and solidarity. You don't have to do it. But if you want to demonstrate progress and solidarity, this is how you do it. Are we creating jobs? Right? So it's a little general. Hopefully that answers like some of your question.
Thank you, Shawn. Thank you. Great job. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning. I think that we know what we need to do. At the Harlem Business Alliance, we've certainly been doing it. We've engaged brilliant Black people on the regular. I appreciate you. You know that. I appreciate everyone who came here this morning. Let's get busy. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
It was a fantastic event today on a much needed to be talked about topic. I want to thank HBA and Shawn for putting this together. It was really good information. I strongly suggest everybody read the book and exercise some of the principles that he talks about.
So many words. Amazing, extraordinary, eye-opening. Thank you, Shawn, for everything that you're doing. The information is hardcore facts that can't be denied and definitely needs to be in the community. And the key is shifting mindset. Totally has changed my way of thinking. And go out and get the book immediately. Many books.
Shawn Rochester's presentation today at the Mist Harlem, sponsored by the Harlem Business Alliance, was inspirational. He talked about the historical perspective of the black tax, the concept of the black tax. He also gave some suggestions on how to increase your wealth and make make this a meaningful presentation. I really appreciate his time and his presentation, and I'm going to use his book and put some of his suggestions to use.
I just feel that this message is key, that we as Black people, we need to pay attention to what is happening, how we're being undervalued, and what needs to be done to correct that. We need to create more Black-owned businesses because we hire one another. We need to deposit more money in Black banks. Everything that Shawn talks about and spoke about in this presentation today, spot on.
It was so moving to me, hearing all that history, which I knew some of and felt it, but it's wonderful to know that it wasn't my imagination, that I was, that this is real, what I'm feeling about how even from today, going backwards, how it affects us. It was so moving that it brought tears to my eyes and certain things that I saw in the presentation, and it made me feel empowered that now I can move forward and there's a whole lot of other souls with me.
I am so reinvigorated, refreshed about how I'm going to go back and make sure that I coalesce with other like-minded people like myself, entrepreneurs, women, and pull ourselves together and really be cognizant of that black tax, because it does two things. Not only does it stress you out and kill you, but if you use it effectively and right, you can change the course for a generation. So thank you, Shawn, thank you, Mr. Rochester, for giving this to us, really palatable, something that we can digest, take, and just break this generational woes of financial and economic shortfall. Thank you so much.